Today we're going to talk about differentiated instruction. We're going to discuss what it is, how teachers differentiate instruction, how teachers prepare their students and classrooms for differentiated instruction, what differentiated instruction looks like in the classroom, and discuss some classroom practices as well. This PowerPoint will give you a better understanding of differentiated instruction. Before I started this project, I didn't know much about it. And now that I started it and learned more about it, I feel like I have a lot of knowledge about it, and I found all of my information from the resources online, from the Educating Exceptional Learners book as well. And I found some of it through the course shell as well. So this is by Lacey Sear. Now let's talk first about what differentiated instruction is. Differentiated instruction involves using different strategies, such as flexible student instructional grouping, learning stations, and learning centers, and two educators in the same classroom. This is taken from the Educating Exceptional Students book. This basically means we teach students in different ways. We teach them through different tactics, strategies, and give them different opportunities to learn. It can also be defined as an approach where teachers adjust their curriculum and instruction to maximize the learning of all students, which is average learners, English language learners, struggling students, students with learning disabilities, and gifted and talented students. This, therefore, basically means that we use a lot of different ideas and concepts to teach different students. Differentiated instruction is not a one-size-fits-all approach, but instead should be shaped to meet the needs of students. This does not mean that teachers individually tailor instruction. Rather, they differentiate instruction for groups of students, which I found from the What is Differentiated Instruction website. Teachers also need to figure out what students struggle in what content area, what exactly they struggle with in that content area, and how they progress in it. This means throughout the year, they need to continually assess students and use flexible grouping. Now let's talk about how teachers teach differentiated instruction. Teachers who practice differentiation in the classroom may design lessons based on students' learning styles, group students by shared interest, topic, or ability for assignments, assess students' learning using formative assessment, manage the classroom to create a safe and supportive environment, and continually assess and adjust lesson content to meet students' needs. This is all ways teachers teach differentiated instruction. They get different techniques and strategies for learners. They can also alter assignments to meet the needs of the students and assess students on an ongoing basis to determine their readiness levels. They basically find the ways that they can teach the children the best and teach them this way. They may teach differently for different groups of students, but the point is to make sure that each student's needs are being met. Readiness refers to a student's knowledge and skill level regarding given content. A student's readiness level might vary across subjects or content areas. Teachers can determine students' readiness level by examining the result of formal or informal tests, such as standardized tests or pre-test, viewing a student's academic record, examining work samples, doing a KWL chart, and things like that. As teachers begin to differentiate instruction, there are three main instructional elements that they can adjust to meet the needs of their learners. Content, which is the knowledge and skills students need to master. Process, which is the activity students use to master the content. And product, which is the method students use to demonstrate learning. This means that we may change these elements, but the changes that are made depends on the students. You can then check them on their readiness levels in these. And these are just some ways to teach differentiated instruction. And I found this again on the What is Differentiated Instruction, a website, which is I found on the course shell. For this slide, we're going to discuss how teachers prepare their students and their classrooms for differentiated instruction. First off, they need to make sure they communicate with all involved. The teacher should explain to the parents and children in the class that all students will be challenged, that Students may be working on different activities or assignments, that the role of the teacher is different, how activities and projects will be assigned, how test results will be used, which means to evaluate student learning, make instructional decisions, provide feedback to the students, and document progress, and how grades will be assigned. Students need to be aware of what this instruction is. If they're aware of it, then they're likely to be excited about it. The website even had different questions to ask your students on the first day so that they know what differentiated instruction is and that it's okay. For example, one question was, do we all learn the same way? And this is a great question because it gets students to thinking. Some children learn from hands-on method, some children are visual learners. The students will realize that everyone learns differently, and they'll be more excited to learn this way. Parents will also appreciate this type of teaching because the teachers will be trying to make sure each child's needs are being met. A classroom also needs to be organized. If it's organized, then it allows for more things to get done and for things to get done quicker as well. And it won't be as chaotic in a classroom. If the teacher isn't organized, like I said, the classroom will be chaotic. The furniture in the classroom needs to be set up where it best fits the students. If the students work best with small groups, then they need to have it set up like that. Or maybe they need flexible seating. It's a teacher's job to make sure when teaching differentiated instruction that this is done and explain this to our students. Also, explain that throughout the year, if it changes or different things with how you're teaching differentiated instruction changes, that you as a teacher will let them know. The teacher also needs to let the children know that there are a set of rules and procedures that they'll follow. It's set to make sure that children get the best learning environment possible. And there could be many different rules that you have, but they also still need to realize that it's the same with any other grade. Just because you're teaching differentiated instruction, rules are still going to apply. And I found all this information on the What is Differentiated Instruction website. Okay, now let's talk about what differentiated instruction looks like in the classroom. There's no one correct method of differentiated instruction. Given all of the instructional strategies and practices that teachers can employ, differentiated instruction can take on many forms. As things progress and you learn more about how your students learn, the way you teach them is likely to change, and therefore it'll change in the classroom. According to the What is Differentiated Instruction website, here's a few ways to get started. You can select one element. This could mean content, process, product, a learning environment to differentiate. You can start with one subject area, so math or science. You can also start with a class of students that is the easiest to work with. Then you could implement only one differentiated activity in a larger lesson or unit. You could begin working with students in small groups, assign homework for different groups of students based on their readiness, interest, or preferred way of demonstrating their knowledge. You could provide support for struggling readers, which are readers with students with learning disabilities and English language learners. And you could use a simple means of gathering information about students. For example, end of chapter tests, like pre-test or surveys. And that's just a few ways of how it's taught, what it might look like in the classroom. The main point of this is to let everyone know how it's done differently and taught differently according to the students, the teachers, and even the parents, because like we've discussed already, the parents are a big role in when we teach differentiated instruction, and they are going to be playing a part of it. For this slide, we're going to talk about common practices and explain why they are not examples of differentiated instruction, as well as describe what your colleagues can do differently. One example is an educator who delivers instruction primarily by lecturing. This is not differentiated instruction because not all students learn through lectures. Students learn in many different ways, like we discussed earlier. It's the teacher's job to make sure each student's needs are being met, and to make sure that they are teaching them to the best of their ability. Instead, a teacher could incorporate different learning activities into the teaching as well, have children work with hands-on activities, read about what you're teaching, and maybe even take a field trip if possible. Lectures can be really long and boring for students, especially for students that don't like learning this way. They may find your voice to be monotone and zone the teacher out. Children's attention span doesn't last long, so it's a teacher's job to keep their attention and make class a fun place to be, and make class as well a fun place to learn. Grouping students at the beginning of the year based on the previous year's achievement test scores isn't differentiated instruction either. Students change and progress, even over the summer. Some might have forgotten what they remembered, and sometimes they need a refresher as well. It's the teacher's job at the beginning of the year to assess the students before putting them in groups based on what they learned last year. Giving bonus points for classroom participation isn't an example of differentiated instruction. Instead, a teacher could not only give out any at all or encourage all the students to be part of the conversation. You could encourage them all to discuss the topic and then reward them at the end of the day with a piece of candy if all contribute. But we need to make sure that we're giving classroom points out for the right reason and not just for participation. Because like we've discussed too, students aren't all going to learn the same way. And so with differentiated instruction, they might not all understand what we're talking about or what we're discussing. And so if only certain kids in the classroom understand this topic that we're going over at this point, then if you give them bonus points, it's not really fair to the rest of the kids in the classroom. Because if they don't understand it, they're not going to be able to get those bonus points that the rest of the kids are unfortunately going to get. So that's why we need to not give bonus points at all, or find different ways to give bonus points. Or giving candy, for example, if everyone participates or makes a comment about what we're learning or talking about in class. For this slide, I have the references I used. I used the What is Differentiated Instruction website for the most and found it online in the class course shell. I also used the education website I found in the Educating Exceptional Learners book as well. Overall, I gained a great deal of knowledge and understanding from doing this assignment, and I can see myself teaching like this in the future. I like that it meets the needs of different groups of children and has allowed me to gain such a great amount of knowledge about it. We talked about what differentiated instruction is and how do teachers differentiate instruction. How do teachers prepare their students and their classrooms for differentiated instruction? What differentiated instruction looks like in the classroom, and the common practices as well. And it's important to remember that as we teach differentiated instruction, that every child is going to learn differently, and that they do not all learn the same, and that as an educator, we will be able to use this in our classroom, and it will help the children's needs be met. I could see myself, since I've learned all this information, using it and teaching it one day to other fellow educators, as well as using it in my own classroom, because I've been a parent in the past, and I have seen how many different students learn different ways, because there are some students that are not as good as reading, and some that are maybe at the higher end of the reading, or some that are in the middle. And it's the teacher's job to make sure that all these students' needs are being met. And so we need to put them at different reading levels, which is a form of different instruction because they're all on different levels, and group them differently as well. And I think there's many different ways you can group them. So you can group like the students that read higher with your students that are a little bit of the medium level, and some are at the low. And you will still have the children that are at the lower level reading a different book. But sometimes when you have them sitting with the higher reading level students and having them listen to them, they might pick up on some of what they're reading, and they also might gain more knowledge from sitting with them. Overall, though, like I said, I've learned quite a deal of information from the website, and thank you for your time.